Good to see you, Hannah. Didn't see you in that rainstorm there. Oh my God. So John and I got to go to see LSU play Tennessee in Knoxville. And could barely see the band from the monsoon. It was raining sideways. Did y'all see video of that? Yeah. That was crazy. We're sitting there huddled down. It was just, I was in a, what do you call this, a poncho. The rain was coming in sideways. It was miserable. And I looked over at John and said, John, don't you want to go in? He goes, no, this is great. Woo-hoo. So it's good to see you nice and dry. So it was a great joy to be at the dinner last night. And Rita, you did a wonderful job. And I'd just like everyone to When I was standing in line to get the food, Kean was standing in front of me, and he was trying to figure out the gravy bowl thing, you know, the gravy bowl, and his potatoes. And I said, do you want me to help you with that? And he said, sure. And so he had his potatoes, I had the gravy thing, and I said, say when? And he went, now. What else could you say? Now I want your gravy now. Anyway, so it's good to be back with you. I've been talking from this book here by Richard Gore, a Jesuit priest, Richard Gore, called Breathing Underwater, Spirituality in 12 Steps. And in this book, he explores aspects of each of the 12 steps, but he starts the whole book by establishing 4 spiritual truths that can lead to personal transformation. And I've gone through the first 3, and today is the 4th and final installment of this talk. And I just want to review those first 3 are, the first one is that we need to suffer to heal. That none of us will go through the process of personal change or learning to be different in the world until we've had enough pain to want to change. So we typically have to suffer to heal. The second spiritual truth was that we need to surrender to win. And all of these seem kind of like oxymorons. It doesn't make sense. How do I surrender to win? But the fact of the matter is, I have to be willing to say, I'm beaten up. I give up. And I need to do this a different way. And once I surrender, it gives me the opportunity. It opens the door, the path for this kind of transformation. And once I've surrendered, then I can ease into the third spiritual truth, which is we have to die to live. Meaning, I cannot be the same person I've always been when I was suffering. And after I've surrendered, then I'm required to move forward, changed, with a different attitude, with different thought processes and different behaviors. If I don't die to the old way, I loop back. It's returned back to the first part, and I'm still suffering to have it healed. So I have to die to live. And the fourth spiritual truth I'm going to be talking about today is the idea that after I've been through the first 3 and I've changed, then in order to stay changed, I need to share what I've learned with other people. I have to give it away to keep it. And one simple way to think about this is someone who wants to pick up the guitar and learn how to play. Now, the suffering part really is that really clumsy part where you're not good. But I love that expression, anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. So it's that suffering through the awkwardness of I'll never get this. I don't want it to be this bad. I like it to be better. And I have to suffer through that part. And the surrender part is, at some point, I just have to say, you know what? Nobody starts out with any kind of skill. Nobody starts and picks up the guitar and just starts playing it. I surrender to the fact that this is a process. And then I have to kind of die to the fact that I think that I should be able to pick it up and start playing. I have to die to the old way of thinking about it, and in that process, as I practice, and as I begin to become more accomplished, then I become a different person in relationship to that guitar. So I had to suffer, I had to surrender, I had to die. And what better way for me to continue to improve my skills and really internalize them than to teach someone else how to play? We always hear that. If you really want to internalize something and really gain a skill, then teach someone else how to do it. Right? So that just is a perfect little small example of it. But one of the things that Richard Orr talks about in this book is he takes it to a deeper level when he talks about two people that have committed to a marriage. And he takes this whole process, 1, 2, 3, 4, and how it continues in a relationship in this marriage. So he said, okay, so people start out and everybody's in love and everything's great and everybody thinks it's going to be wonderful forever. And everybody in this room knows that's ever been married or in a committed long-term relationship that at some point there's this shift and you go, when did that happen? Right? When things aren't as la-la as they were in the very beginning. And we begin to suffer. We begin to suffer the fear of being abandoned. We begin to suffer the fear of, like John Prine said, his dad, grandpa's in the front yard leaning on a rake, wondering if his marriage was a terrible mistake. You begin to question. You begin to question. Because you're suffering. And Rohr says, typically that kind of la-la period can last for any number of years, but usually if a couple makes it through those rough spots till about the 7th or 8th year, and you've done this kind of transformation, then it's got a good chance of surviving. But we get to this place, however quickly it happens, maybe a year and a half or 2 years into it, maybe 3 years into it, that we begin to suffer. And at that point, we can go our separate ways and get into another relationship and get to that point and we're going to suffer again. Or we can stay where we are and say, okay, how do we change this? How do we fix this? And we go through the process of surrendering. I thought I knew how to do this. I think I have some pretty good ideas about it, but something about the way we're doing this isn't working. Or isn't working as well as we'd like it to. So we surrender. And typically that looks like going to a therapist, going to a marriage counselor, so we can sit down and say, look, this is what's going on. What can't we see? We're going to surrender to someone who can help us sort this out and teach us a different way. And usually within that process, both people are surrendering again because they have to learn how they're contributing to the good parts of the relationship and the problems. So there's a process of having to surrender for this relationship to succeed. And that leads to the next part, which is each person has to own the idea that I need to die to the way that I used to be if we're going to live together successfully. I really do have to step back and go, wait a second. Some of the things that I've always thought to be true aren't. And some of the ways I thought were the right ways to act aren't. And I have to be willing to let go and slough off that old reality, typically that we gain in our childhood, within our families, and in other relationships we've been in prior to that one. But I get to a point where I have to really say, if this is going to work, I cannot be the way I've always been. So I have to die to live. And then the idea of, for us to keep this, we need to give it away, is I need to be willing to be that new person with my partner in the marriage. And I need to be willing to give that away and continue the 3 things that I've been through, specifically the surrender and the dying to my old ways, and I need to continue being willing to give that away. And to the extent that anybody asks me, and this is where it gets kind of tricky, I need to be willing to sit in that with someone else and share with them where I've been. Because because by sharing that, it helps them heal, but it also reinforces it for me. Now, it can get a little bit dicey here, because I know personally, I'm inclined to, once I've been through that process, to want to help everybody. And you know what? It doesn't work unless they ask you. It really is a much better deal when they're interested in your input, instead of you just showing it up and sharing it with them. So that's another little guide to the old way. This is about personal transformation. In 12-step language, we hear the word spiritual awakening all the time. I think it's fair to say that people that are here today are all on a path. You're seeking. You want deeper spiritual awakening. However you understand that, and however you experience it, or you wouldn't be here. So we're looking for that kind of spiritual awakening. And in 12-step language, it's not a burning bush. It's not the voice of Sean Connery talking to us from behind the clouds. Not so good. That's not what I should. Richard gave it like a 4.5. Tough crowd. But the idea that it's going to be some profound experience is sometimes what throws us off. It has a lot to do with our expectations. Because the truth is, spiritual awakening is really about personality change. It's about, not that I might be an introvert or an extrovert, or that, I process information a certain way, but how I view the world in relationship, how I view myself in relationship to the world, other people, in this idea of God as I understand God. In 12-step language, you hear personality change sufficient to sustain my recovery. There's a whole bunch of surrender in that. There's a whole bunch of I want to be teachable. There's a whole bunch of willingness in that. And that's the personality change that I'm after. So, personal transformation. But one of the things that Richard Rohr talks about here is the failure of mainstream church, mainstream religion, to foster that kind of transformation. Instead, we get what Bonhoeffer called was cheap grace. We show up, put 10% in the basket, and then go on about our ways and feel like we've done what we're supposed to do. In Christian terms, it's like I'm living the Gospels, I'm walking the path of Christ somehow, by showing up for an hour and a half once a week and putting 10% in and not doing anything inside to change. I'm going to read this because I want to get the quote exactly right. When he's talking about, and I'm not picking on the Catholics here, but this because he's a priest, he addresses the people he's worked with. He says, many arch-conservative Catholics are great lovers of the papacy until the Pope talks about the evils of war, capitalism, capital punishment, or the rights of labor unions. In fact, they often refuse to admit that he even said such things. And I think that's because we would rather say I'm doing it than actually doing it.
Yeah.
Okay. That is what this whole 4-part series has been about. The idea that it's so easy to check in and act like I'm doing the personal transformation than actually doing it. And so that's my hope, that we collectively and we each as individuals begin to embrace this spiritual journey as individual personal transformation, so that we recognize there are parts of my life in which I'm suffering, but it's okay. In fact, that is a growth point for me. So I've got suffering, but that leads to my healing. I need to recognize I can't heal unless I surrender to a different way. And in that surrendering process, I have the opportunity to be personally transformed. And in that personal transformation, that difference, that shift in my heart, that I then take out into the world, I begin the transformation and the healing of the world around me because I've internalized the idea that for me to keep this, I need to share it in infinite and multitudinous ways with everybody that I engage.